Okay, welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind podcast. Now, another really interesting guest. We've got Joel Dunahoe here. Now, Joel is based in Cincinnati in Ohio in the US, and I think is going to have a lot of interesting insights around some data and analytics strategies and initiatives that he's been working on. So, Joel, why don't I just throw it over to you to give us a much better background about what you've done in the past and what you're currently doing, who you're working with, and then we can just see where the conversation goes from there.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me first off, Sam. Appreciate that. And just from an experience standpoint, I've been in this field for probably 25 years now, which is a little scary to say, but started off more on the straight traditional reporting side of things, and that was intriguing. And I think like anything, you just start to dive in a little bit more and ultimately understand where data comes from and where information starts to become valuable. So that kept me kind of plugged in, and so I've had good opportunities through my career to work with some startup type companies as well as some Fortune 500 companies. And so from that standpoint, I've seen a lot on a small scale and obviously large enterprise scales too. So that's been again a great experience for me along the way. I would say up until actually my current role, a lot of my time has been spent on the business side of things. Generally with BI solutions, you're either on the business side or you're on the IT side, and I've historically been on the business side, be it in marketing, finance, sales enablement, all those areas, and like I said, more recently now on the technology side. So it's a different perspective. I'm not going to say one's any better than the other. It's just a different perspective, and it's good to get that to sort of well round things out. So.
Yeah, nice.
Happy to talk to you again, and we can talk through any questions you have.
Yeah, sounds good. So who you just give everyone a bit of scope around what you're dealing with at the moment. Who maybe just touch upon the company that you're working with now, and maybe just broadly some of the initiatives that you're touching within that business.
Sure. Company I'm with now is called Archer Daniels Midland. They're obviously Google them and you'll see that they're notoriously built around farming. But their mantra these days is largely it's sort of food oriented, but there's a lot of additional work being done in nutrition, both animal and human nutrition, probiotics, plant-based proteins is a new area. Matter of fact, there was just a recent announcement they're doing some work with some insect-based protein work, which is, again, this is all sort of fascinating to me in terms of how we leverage, food and to not only obviously supply food products to people, but to leverage it in a number of other ways. And so that's, a pretty fascinating industry to be a part of. And then specifically in my role, I sit in what we call our data and analytics function, and it's largely responsible. We're in a pretty massive strategic move right now to organize our data into a single repository. So I know that's not necessarily new ways of thinking, but at the same time, for a company like ADM, who has done a fair amount of growth, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, a lot of the data sources that have been acquired remain as sort of one-off data sources. And so there's a large initiative, multi-year initiative underway to get that data again sort of in a single repository, Azure-based environment, and then to obviously be able to serve that data up through some of the BI tools that we have. So that is kind of where things are right now. We're probably 1.5 years into about a 5 to 6 year plan. So, some work has been done, but plenty of work ahead. And I would say the large part of the work ahead is, as we've been getting it, and somebody said this the other day, is that we're technologists, not marketers. So we just call it make data available. We need to make our data available to our customers. That's ultimately what they're asking for. And so that's really kind of where the energy and the efforts being put forth right now within my team is starting to organize and get our deliverables set up to make data available to our end customers. And those are internal customers. It's not external facing. This is purely an internal service right now.
Great. Yeah, there's some really good things I think we can touch upon with that. The one thing that sort of sticks out when you talk about growth within a business, I think that's quite interesting from a data and analytics perspective. And you mentioned that you acquired data sets, and I like the way that you framed that, because it seems like more and more now the data sets are seen as real assets. They're real assets to a business. And as you're growing through, say, mergers or through just expansion strategies, it'd be really interesting to touch upon how you strategically think about these data assets, and then ultimately how you then are bringing them together. Like, what are some of the tools that you're using, and how are you just sort of planning out and prioritizing how to bring all these assets together?
Yeah, I mean, you're just spot on. I mean, the challenge of growth obviously is, especially growth through acquisition. And again, this is not exclusive to ADM by any means. And my previous employer was a pretty high acquisitive company, and so that type of growth, especially as it gets to data. Yes, in many cases, that data is probably one of the top 3 or 4 valuable assets that you're acquiring. I mean, sometimes you're acquiring a brand or a trademark or something along those lines. But yeah, I think to your point, data is becoming on par with those kinds of assets that you're looking at. And then ultimately, yes, you want to unearth those and unlock their value. Now, the challenge, of course, is that the way things were done in that company that you acquired are not always the way things are done in the current environment. Both just in the traditional people, process, and technology, they were done differently, and the data is stored differently. And so that's where some of the challenge starts to become, is how do we sort of uniformly start to assimilate that data into a singular environment. And again, back to the data strategy project that I just mentioned, that's part of the challenge. Is you've got multiple ERP systems, multiple CRM systems. Again, similar language, but not always the same in terms of how fields are defined and described and the information contained within. So yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of work that goes in. We've got a variety of systems and business process analysts that are largely sort of prescribed to work on that data ingestion work, or that data basically trying to find the commonality between all these disparate data sets to create a uniform view. We do use a variety of tools for that. Actually, the latest tool set we're using is coming from Click Technologies, and we use both their Replicate solution as well as their Compose solution for their ETL work to start to pull that data into our environment these days. So, but yeah, it's something that we're definitely challenged by. We're trying to get into playbook type structures, where we're actually defining, in the future as we acquire that next company, because we will do it again, trying to be more prescriptive about, okay, these are certain questions we want to ask. These are actions we want to take as we acquire these companies. So we're a little bit more, I think, thoughtful about the data as it's being acquired, and then ultimately that as we get to that point of ingesting it, we're that much smarter, hopefully, by doing some of that upfront legwork to really get into, just like you would treat any kind of due diligence that you would do on a company before you purchase them. I think generally that due diligence is done at the financial level and other levels. I think data is, like I said, becoming on par with that level of due diligence as well. To be more active about understanding the kind of data that is being made available by that acquisition target.
Mm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I'd like to dive into this a little bit more because this
Mhm.
is something that I think with the value of data almost exponentially seems to be growing over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Um, this is going to become more and more important, right? It's like a lot of the value that you can get from an acquisition is truly understanding the data and knowing how to optimize the data, etc. So having a bit of a playbook, I think, is a great strategic framework to approach these sort of expansion strategies. So so I want to dive into maybe the playbook side of things first, but I want to also understand Click and these two this functionality that you mentioned. So
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like instead of sort of like a cut and paste into your own environment, you're sort of doing a copy and paste into your own environment. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at that. And then ultimately, we, like any company, right? You don't want to assume too much technical debt along the way as you do that acquisition. Just like you don't want to, bring on too much financial debt. So I think in our case, it's initially copy and paste, and then ultimately we do need to figure out a rationalization strategy, as well. What do we want to do with that legacy application over time?
Mhm.
Or as we bring it in, do you make a call that you do want to, no longer use that system? Again, I think some of that gets back into the due diligence of, the data assessment and making those kind of recommendations. There's certain things that you may want to cut and paste, to use your language there. There's other things that you do want to, copy and paste, allow that legacy system to continue to operate for some limited time frame. You might want to put in 18 months, we're going to sunset that particular application. And that is actually what, in many cases, what we do is we do put some time parameters around, how long you're going to retain that legacy system.
Mhm.
So, but with that in mind, yes. So the Click tools, Replicate specifically is more around that lift of data. So we, in common terms, we have a data lake. And so that data lake is really intended for that straight data ingestion. And that's what Replicate helps us do is to, again, lift the source as is, no transformation done, just largely
Mhm.
it's what was in the source is what's going to be in our lake.
Mhm.
And then where Compose comes in is more in that ETL world, and starts to then, as we think about building out the data marts and the data models that we want, that's where Compose comes in and helps us in more traditional ETL space, to
Right.
help work through that.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like Compose is similar to, say, like a Alteryx type product, or
Yeah, exactly.
yep, Power BI has the Power Query editor. So sort of similar sort of things.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Nice. Now, okay, that's really interesting. I haven't had too many Click users on the podcast so far, so it's good to get a whole variety of different uh, perspectives on things that can be utilized within organizations. Now, getting back to the playbook, what are some of the, when you are growing or you are acquiring, what are some of the key things that you look for, or that you would like have in your checklist as part of your playlist? I just think that would be really interesting. Like, what are some of the key things to look out for when you are trying to acquire these data assets?
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think you're sort of going across the spectrum of all the, call it the enterprise tools that your target has. And again, most of these targets do have, an ERP system. They might have that CRM system. They might have they might have marketing applications, for example, or obviously Salesforce or other tools like that come into play. So I think in large part you are just simply cataloging and understanding from an inventory standpoint what solutions they have. Again, back to the question of how much of those applications do we need to think about bringing over, and if we do bring them over, are we bringing them over for an indefinite amount of time or some fixed period of time. So I think those are sort of the fundamentals that you're doing is just, simply understanding what's available. And I think some of those get in as you make those, again, cut and paste decisions versus copy and paste decisions, is, there's certain things that you're going to do in a very quick fashion, so financials, for example, if they obviously have a GL system or some financial management system, generally you're going to be looking to bring those over quickly because you're going to want to, again, sort of get those into your own financials, so you can start to do, holistic reporting going forward from a financial perspective. Some of the other non-financial systems then, might fall behind in terms of the stagger in which you're going to choose to bring those in to the environment as well. So, I think the approach we take is still, quite honestly, being defined. I think we're getting better at it, and we want to get better at it. So I think part of this is we're still defining that playbook a bit, but that's the idea, right? Is that you are approaching this in a much more structured way and trying to templatize the way you go about making these data acquisitions. So, but yeah, again, largely we look at the entire landscape, and really you start to value things based on some of those key categories of again, traditional systems where, if it's transactional information you need or financial information you need, those are obviously the high value ones. And then you kind of work down the pecking order from that standpoint.
Nice. And so I think a good process, if you were, say, someone was looking to build out a playbook themselves, would be to look at an organization and then think about investigate all of the potential data assets they have. And then once you have this sort of mind map of all of the assets, then it's sort of maybe placing some sort of scorecard on each asset to prioritize which ones that you should be trying to bring across or trying to centralize as a matter of priority versus others. Do you think that would be a sound strategy?
Yeah, I think that's sound, as well as, I might take it a step further and say you probably need to take the step of looking at your own assets first, and then start to figure out, okay, what do we have, and how are we structured as well, and then obviously yes, once you know that, then you can start to figure out where those piece parts align well with what your asset structure is too.
That is actually a super point. Is that I bet that this doesn't even happen in a lot of organizations already, who are doing the inquiring, and I think that as data is becoming such a centerpiece in how you pursue strategies, you make decisions, etc. It's almost your data assets needs to be as visible as like an org chart almost. Like even having that as visible as possible, so that you can improve the buy-in and engagement of your own teams, your own organizations, before you go and approach or you go and pursue any of these other strategies. I think could be a valuable exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely high frequency conversation, I would say, that we have that and talk about, kind of that visibility into, can you ultimately have kind of a, in best case, like maybe a dashboard of your environment, right? Where you could, by location, understand what all the applications and data assets are in a given location. But back to your point, could you do that at a corporate level or an enterprise level and start to understand, okay, this is the full gamut. And we have some tools like that. They're homegrown, but tools that give us some visibility into the applications that we have, and I think they're good. And just like anything, you'd like them to be better, as far as what they tell you, and you'd like to start to understand. This application high level has this subject area inside of it, and it covers these business divisions, and it's got, X number of users. And so, so it's almost like a business glossary of all the applications that we've got. Again, we've got some tools in place, and just, need to build that out a bit more, because yeah, that kind of visibility is important, not only just from a data acquisition perspective, but just day-to-day use, right? As you talk to business stakeholders and talk about data sets that they need, you'd like to be able to point them to or something that would give that insight in terms of this is available. We have these 5 ERP systems, and these 5 ERP systems are covering these 25 business units, whatever the case might be.
Yeah, I think that maybe historically everyone's sort of diverted to what a data dictionary, right? But that just sounds super boring. There almost needs to be something that's a bit more engaging, something a bit more visual, something a bit more dynamic. And I think that's a valuable. I don't even know of a perfect tool that sort of highlights your current data assets or lets you map them out. I think that is a really valuable exercise.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. I mean, it's like anything. I think I haven't seen the perfect one. I mean, I think there's some that do some things well in terms of data source cataloging and mapping. You can look at Information Steward, for example, as a tool that's very good at doing that. But it tends to lean, I would say, more technical, and so in terms of database and table schemas and that kind of level of information. But yeah, I think what I'm describing, and maybe even what you're describing, is really kind of a business friendly view of that same information to just sort of bubble it up at a level that again, a business person might look at it and go, okay, yeah, that's where the GL is, and the GL is covering these business units for me. But if that GL is sort of buried under the, database schema name that nobody, there's no GL mentioned in that, again, maybe a business person might not pick that up as easily. And so that's where again, we're trying to elevate and figure out a way to, call that, if you want to call it metadata, business metadata about the data assets that you've got. Trying to figure out a way to present that.
Yeah, I think that is this. I really like the whole idea of doing that more, and it's not something that we've really touched upon in previous episodes. So I'm glad we've dived into it a little bit, and hopefully that gives some inspiration around how you could how you should sort of think about these common problems or these common challenges that organizations have. What I think would be really good now, Joel, would be to just go back a bit, because right at the beginning when you did your intro, you said that you've worked at startups and you've worked at some Fortune 500 companies. And so what I think would be interesting is, obviously there's, you're working with different resources in each of those types of businesses, right? And I was wondering, if you're a smaller organization, what are some of the things that you should, and what you maybe have done in the past, what should you focus on as a small organization to try and get as much out of your data as maybe, say, a larger organization can with a much bigger resource pool?
Yeah, good question. Probably have to put a little thought in that one, because it's been a while since the startup days. But I would say, as you might imagine, with the smaller company and that sort of startup aspect to it, there's not a lot of process. There's not a lot of, sort of organizational. It's more like just figure it out, just get it done. And so while, you can appreciate that, that's the kind of attitude that needs to happen in a startup, and until they kind of get their legs about them, it, I think it does prove challenging, because in many cases you are dealing with, again, sort of the lack of rigor, and so it's can be a little bit Wild West in terms of how people go about getting data. However they get the data, it may drive potentially to a different conclusion than somebody else who got the same data and maybe did something else with it. And so I think that's kind of the risk of that type of environment is, the lack of sort of common data sets, common repositories, common ways of looking at the same information is just not always available, because everybody's sort of moving at as fast as they can to get their world or their chore done in that startup space. And so I think that's the advice I would give is because generally nobody wants to hear that, right? We're trying to move fast, and I don't want process slows things down. Is I think in the absence of that, you do run the risk that you're, again, especially with my data hat on or information hat on, is I think there's a higher risk that you're potentially not driving as much value out of the data, because you're doing things where the data could be bad. Ultimately is maybe what you're making decisions, you're making choices based on data that maybe is not being organized and collected in a consistent way. And so I think there's just a higher risk that you're gonna, again, get to a wrong conclusion or a bad insight, or make a decision based on maybe some flawed assumption that the data might be telling you. So that's kind of my sense of that startup feel from a 20-year ago mindset on that one.
Yeah, well, the tool, I think, would probably be on the same page here, that the tools that we are able to use in the analytics space have improved out of sight in the last sort of 5 to 8 years, right? Mm-hmm. Do you feel, though, now with your more heavy experience in some large organizations, is there some ideas that you've been involved with, that you've gathered over time, that you think could be translated into smaller businesses a lot easier now than maybe it was in the past?
Yeah, I think one of the things you said there is especially with the tools, and especially again in the BI space, right? You can look at a tool like Tableau or Power BI for that matter, that are really you can in all essence pick it up, and probably in a day you can be dangerous with that tool, to be able to interact with data and start to to build out different KPIs or views or even charts and mappings that years ago nobody would have thought of that, right? That'd be impossible, or it would take months to build. So I think the tools that are available today can certainly speed your development cycle, speed your insight delivery. Again, but I always sort of go back to the fundamentals of, if you can make as many visuals and KPIs, but if the underlying data is not organized properly, or broad terms, it's just bad data, you're just making your bad choices off that bad information. So I think that as a large company, back to your point about resources and capabilities, I think some of the things that we do in large enterprises, like ADM and some of those previous experiences I've had, is that you start to interject things like master data management and data governance, and you bring in again, business process analysts that are doing documentation and ensuring that people, have better awareness. We're working towards where we want to get to a point where we say that the data is certified, and that you actually, put a little check mark or something next to the data, so people know that that is a trusted data source, and you can confidently, interrogate that data and know that it's telling you what the systems are producing. And so again, I think those are things that just as a large enterprise, you're obviously able to do. Maybe that in a small enterprise, you're just not, or a startup, you're not maybe thinking about it in that respect. Now that said, I think that the counter to all of that is that a startup moves fast, right? And so you can pivot very quickly. Is if you do, let's assume you're making an insight based or a decision based on the good data that you had available to you. Maybe you recognize something in that data, and all of a sudden it drives hey, we need to turn and make a quick left turn on this decision for a large enterprise. That's hard to do. because you're dealing with an ocean liner or a steamship or whatever analogy you want to use there, but that thing's hard to turn. And it takes a lot of effort and buy-in to make those turns, whereas a startup is nimble and can make those turns pretty quickly if the data sort of helps to lead that decision. So that's that's obviously the counterpoint to all of that, is that startups are small and nimble, and sometimes these large enterprises are they're hard to turn and head into a different direction. So
yeah, one of the things that I've definitely learned myself just from discussing strategies with previous guests is that I think the fundamentals of your data strategy don't change depending on how big or small your organization is. It's still about identifying those opportunities, those optimizations, those forecasts, or just the key insights that are going to really drive the business, and then prioritizing which ones are going to, say, have the highest return on investment. And I think with a startup, a good way to think about it is that, yes, you might not have the resources, you might not have the funds, but usually with a smaller organization, there's only, you can move the needle so much more with, say, one data initiative than, say, you're in a larger organization and you've got all of these different pools of data. It could be marketing, it could be HR, it could be sales, it could be inventory management. There's just so many. The scope is so much wider, so it's much harder to move the needle. And so if you in a startup organization, I feel like if you can really focus in on maybe the one or the two or the three key insights or key value unlocks around your data, that's you can make make a huge impact on your growth, your profitability, your revenue, etc. So to me, that's sort of what I intuitively think, and also what I've sort of taken away from some of the things that you've mentioned.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. And I former CFO I used to deal with a lot, and he always described them as levers, right? So you've got levers that you can pull, and like you said, I mean, sometimes those levers are within a department, and so I pull a lever here, it might impact something within my department, but at this local or at the larger enterprise scale, not going to move the needle at all. It's not going to change anything. Whereas in a startup environment, yeah, I make that lever tweak, and I just I move something 20% on my bottom line because I made that choice. So I mean certainly the scale of a large enterprise allows you to do that. And again, I'll pick on that same CFO because you talk about placing bets, right? You place bets, you might place 10 different bets on 10 different things. And if 9 of those bets don't pay off, maybe it's no harm, no foul, because the impact of those was offset because this one bet did pay off, and it paid for those 9 misses that I just made. Again, if you take that same analogy into a startup, you might have damaged that company's ability to operate if you made 10 bets and 9 failed along this one. So again, a lot of these things obviously fall into risk tolerance and the company's willingness to try different things. Obviously, I'm always going to lean back on if you trust the data and believe the data, it helps to mitigate some of that risk, because the data is hopefully giving you some better insight. Still need to trust your gut and still need to trust other factors, but certainly having good data support that decision. I think again helps to mitigate some of those choices, makes you feel a little more comfortable about making them, because you've got some good insight that's available to you.
Yeah, I actually go back to my financial roots, which sort of where my background is, and a lot of the initiatives that you can take on from a data perspective is very much like portfolio management, where you're trying to build a portfolio of assets with a sort of broad strategy, and then you obviously, you're going to have some winners, you're going to have some losers, and I think the same can be said, for your analytics initiatives, right? You need, that's how you need to think about it. And
Yeah.
whether you're a small business or a large business, your pool of assets, your portfolio size is just going to be different, right? But you still need to
Right.
try and pick and choose what you focus your efforts and resources on.
Yeah. Yeah. And along those lines, we do try to, even with data and supporting different initiatives, we've got a data science team. And so a lot of the work that they're doing, it is that sort of, MVP prototyping, trying out different things. Those, again, use that analogy of 10 of those things you might try and 9 may fail, but that 10th one actually is an eye opener because, that was something that we didn't know, or gives us, may introduce another hypothesis that we want to go validate. But again, I think within large companies, you potentially are able to do that a bit more maybe than you could in a startup. But at the same time, even at a startup on a smaller scale, you made 3 bets like that, and one of those could be pretty significant too along the way. But yeah, definitely would like the idea of the typical model of failing fast. Try things. If it doesn't work out, let's punt on that one and regroup and recast and figure out how we want to move forward from there. So yeah, that's part of our mindset in the current workplace. So
nice. Okay, well now a couple more questions maybe.
Yeah.
One thing that is there anything unique that you've got exposure to or that you're working on that you think would be great to touch on? Is there, obviously you've had a long career in the data space, you've seen a lot of changes. Is there anything new and exciting, or something that really interests you in what you're able to implement right now in your current environment?
The interesting part, I think, again, and again, I know this sounds pretty basic because we're not marketers, but I think just knowing some of the history at ADM, I mean, they've been challenged, I think, to bring data available and making it available in meaningful ways, for people to make better decisions from. And again, I know that just sounds like business intelligence 101. But I think in the case of a company like ADM, that's something that they're recognizing. I mean, and maybe it just hasn't been the priority as it has been in the past. And so, from the executive team on down, I feel like that is starting to get the same level of attention as financial statements overall. So I think that, for me, as somebody that plays in this space, that's encouraging, and it's incredibly important too, right? I mean, ultimately you need that level of support, that level of buy-in from the C-suite, to ensure that some of these things can get done and get done well, and that's what that's ultimately what we're trying to deliver and make sure happens, because that's our thought obviously is that is more and better data becomes available. You get good data in the right hands in front of smart people, then that absolutely should lead to great outcomes. With the leadership team. So very confident about that. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily interesting in terms of it doesn't what we're doing is not necessarily maybe new and different than what other companies doing. It's just the fact that it's a concerted, highly supported effort is I think is keeps it pretty interesting for me and pretty unique for me. And it's again, I would say it's incredibly important. I've worked for several companies where you ultimately you talk about data and even master data management and things like that. And people get really excited for a while. And then after a while, it's like, I'm not really getting much from this. So can we cut back on some of these data programs, or can we maybe not do that one right now because it's just not giving me the benefit of something else that we're working on. So I think, getting that level of getting and feeling that level of support here is pretty powerful, for the, not only for me as an individual, but for, the overall data teams that are working on this.
So how as someone in the data and analytics area within a business, how do you think that you can showcase the value more effectively to your stakeholders so that you don't find when maybe the organization is plateauing, and the growth isn't happening? How can you continue to showcase that unlocking your data assets is the key to a more prosperous future? How do you think that as part of the space we can showcase that better over
Right.
the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first off, it starts with delivery, right? You gotta demonstrate and show that this information does matter, that you can make decisions from it. I think back to a former colleague of mine that anytime I showed him a dashboard or a KPI, his first question was, "So what?" And I always sort of that is two ways, right? So what without a comma, and then so comma what? So what in the sense of, why are you showing me this? Tell me what's important about what you're showing me. And then the so comma what is, so what do I do now? You're showing me this great information, or you're showing me this. What's the next thing I need to see? What's the next metric I need to know? Or what's the next, what's the insight I should glean from this? So I always think, anytime I, have teams build solutions now, I always sort of ask that internally, so what? Because, I think as I think about how we're evolving, ADM and our information delivery, it's hopefully we're by giving that information in a timely and very iterative manner. Because we're, let's be honest, we're not going to, I mentioned this was it's a multi-year initiative. So it's going to take us a while. So, as patient as people want to be, ultimately they're going to run out of patience unless you start showing them, things at some level of regularity. And so that's important, to be able to, as you talk about, KPIs or dashboards or reports or whatever the end deliverable is, that you show them progress. I think back in my previous company, I worked at a company called WorldPay. We developed a sales portal for a new sales leader. And I think by the time I left, we were probably on the, 18th, 19th version of it over the course of maybe 3 years. And so, point being is that that evolved because we kept on finding out new ways to either add to it or improve on what's already there. But it was, again, it was highly engaged, and that's the way, we tend to operate, and I like to operate, is you've got to show people, show people their stuff. That's ultimately what they're looking for. You can talk to all of them all day about, master data management, data strategy, and how we're going to bring things into the data lake. But ultimately they're saying, I don't have anything in front of me right now. So, that's great that we're doing all that work, but until you can actually, show me something and show me how it's going to help, I'm not there with you. And so to me, it's starting to, even if it's, again, if you want to use the KPI analogy and they ask for 20 KPIs and you show them 2, that's fine, but you better come back in a month and show them 4 more. And, in the next month, come back and show them, 6 more. And then I fixed the last 2 that we talked about and made those better. And so I think it's just continually showing the progress and the value. And I think by doing that, you're not only sort of reinforcing that, yes, we're doing our job, but it's also allowing them to come back and say, I thought this was going to be important. It's actually not. So let's take that off and let's, now let's talk about something else. And so I think it still allows for that level of engagement as well, where you can course correct and almost kind of feel, startup-y, I guess, in that respect, and that you're able to, change fairly quickly depending on, kind of where you are in the development cycle. But hopefully, it allows us to have kind of that active engagement. So that's really, from a philosophy standpoint, that's one that I've used for probably the last 10 years. It's just, I don't know if it was agile before agile became, the way of operating, but that's the way that we typically tend to operate is just in a highly iterative fashion.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to build a bunch of stuff that nobody cares about. So back to the so what. You don't want it to be the so what in terms of this doesn't even matter to me. So we want the so what to be informative.
Yeah, I think you've really touched upon some huge trends that I think have been playing out for a number of years now, but are going to become even more relevant in going forward if you really want to unlock value out of your analytics initiatives. A couple of the things that I think that I'm seeing that I think you touched upon really well is that the IT and analytics areas need to work closer to the business than ever before. You need to generate this feedback loop, and you really need to be answering the questions that the business wants to know. And the way that I've framed this is I call it the analytics flywheel. You want to be doing this iterating. You want to do this prototyping as fast as possible, and then getting this feedback loop, and then creating this flywheel effect. And I think if you can really implement that well within an organization, that's where you're going to see the most success from these initiatives. You're also going to get the most buy-in and engagement from the business, and that's ultimately what's going to, that's how you're really going to showcase the value in what you are doing with these initiatives. So that's one of the big trends I'm seeing, and I think you certainly touched upon that as well. And the other thing I think is historically, and even now, a lot of the analysis is very descriptive. It's very like what has happened in the past, and you're really just showcasing that. And I feel that if you really want to showcase the value and constantly showcase it in a way that everyone always sees value in what you're doing, I think you've got to be a bit more prescriptive. I think you've got to have more recommendations. I think you've got to have a little bit of prediction. It doesn't have to be too super advanced, but like sort of like scenario analysis, like what would happen if this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where that's the sort of output that you've got to aim for. It can't just be. It's got to be a multiple times better than, say, just the static reporting that someone could have got in a PowerPoint presentation. These new tools can make it dynamic, but you can also really dive into the data. You can really analyze it and create quite prescriptive insights that will drive decisions and will make a difference to decisions. And so, yeah, I think we sort of are talking about the same things, and it's just about maybe we've got slightly different frameworks around how we approach them, but definitely those are the big trends that I am sort of seeing and sort of gather you are as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Especially in the predictive space, obviously, and even back to the the tools you've talked about. The tools have advanced well, and so doing things again that 3 years ago, thinking about prescriptive or predictive scenario planning inside of a BI tool was just it wasn't. I'm not saying it wasn't unheard of, but it was somewhat challenging, and now it's not. I mean that's. You can call it table stakes in terms of the expectation that you do have some predictive power or scenario planning capability inside the tool, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, you do want that ability to allow your users to interact and do some what if, or to do the if this happens then this. That kind of planning is absolutely on our radar, and something that we think is definitely going to add value to the solutions that we build. So yeah, we're not looking to be, there's always that historical lens that you need. You need to understand trends, and you need to understand that historical performance, the current state. But yeah, more and more for sure. People are wanting the, that's great. Now what if this happens? And so that's where, yeah, we're starting to lean forward from that standpoint.
Nice. Okay, Joel. Well, I think that's a great way to end. I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and it's been great to get your perspectives on things. You've had significant amount of experience in this space. You've seen a lot of change, and also I think you're working in a unique environment where data and analytics is becoming more relevant by every sort of month that passes. So really appreciate your time today, and thanks for all your unique insights.
Same as well. Enjoyed the conversation.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Analytic Mind podcast. Definitely subscribe through your favorite listening device, and don't forget to leave us some feedback. We always check it. We always are trying to make our conversation as engaging as possible, and really enjoy getting on a whole variety of guests. So through your feedback, we really that really drives what we are looking to do with the podcast. So thanks for all those who've left it in the past, and look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Okay, thanks again, Joel. Let's wrap things up. Cheers.